The air in the dimly lit lounge was thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and something sharper, the electric pull of a magnetic field I couldn't escape. I felt his presence before I saw him, a sudden warmth radiating against my back that made the fine hairs on my neck stand up. When I finally turned, he was already there, hovering just inches away. He didn't move back. Instead, he leaned in, his shoulder brushing mine with a slow, deliberate friction that sent a jolt straight to my chest. My heartbeat didn't just speed up, it thudded, heavy and rhythmic, echoing in my ears until the pulse of the music faded into the background. "You're doing that thing again," he whispered, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that felt like a secret pressed against my skin. He reached out, his fingers tracing the rim of my glass before ghosting over the back of my hand. It wasn't a grab, it was a lingering, featherlight graze that made my breath hitch. I looked up, trapped in the intensity of his gaze. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and focused entirely on my lips. The silence between us became a living thing, charged with a tension so thick I felt like I could reach out and snap it. I tried to think of a witty comeback, a way to tease him back and regain control, but my mind was a fog of nerves and adrenaline. He noticed. A slow, predatory smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth as he stepped even closer, effectively pinning me against the mahogany bar. The heat rolling off him was intoxicating. He reached up, his thumb skimming my jawline, a bold gesture that felt like a claim. "Your heart is racing," he murmured, his eyes locking back on mine with a terrifying clarity. "I can see it right here." He tapped the hollow of my throat, and for a second the world tilted. Every instinct I had, every quiet, nagging voice in the back of my head was screaming at me to take a step back, to recognize the danger masked by that handsome face. My gut was twisting, a cold knot of warning in the pit of my stomach, telling me that this wasn't just chemistry, it was a trap. But as his hand slid into my hair, pulling me just a fraction closer until our breaths mingled, the warning faded into a dull hum. I silenced the intuition that had never failed me before. I decided right then and there to ignore the alarm bells. I leaned into him, closing the final inch between us, unaware that I was stepping off a ledge I couldn't see. The morning light was far less forgiving than the amber glow of the bar. As I watched Julian sleep, the sharp angles of his face softened, but the unease in my chest only hardened. We had been us for 6 months, a whirlwind of high-velocity passion and grand gestures, yet I realized I knew everything about his preferences and nothing about his soul. Our relationship was built on a foundation of shimmering glass, beautiful to look at, but prone to shattering under the slightest pressure. The cracks had started appearing weeks ago, disguised as trivialities. There were the phone calls he took in the other room, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper, and the way he'd sometimes look past me, his eyes clouded with a distant, cold calculation. Whenever I tried to bridge the gap, to ask what he was thinking, he would masterfully redirect the energy. He'd pull me into his space, his hands finding the small of my back, drawing me in until my questions dissolved into the heat of his touch. He used desire as a silencer, and I was a willing victim of the quiet. I got out of bed, the cold floorboards grounding me. On his nightstand sat a leather-bound journal I'd never seen him open. My hand hovered over it, my pulse thrumming with a mix of guilt and a desperate need for clarity. Just as my fingertips grazed the cover, I felt a hand wrap firmly around my wrist. Looking for something? Julian was awake, sitting up with a fluid, feline grace. He didn't let go. His grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute. He pulled me toward him until I was forced to sit on the edge of the mattress, my wrist still trapped in his hand. The romantic tension that usually felt like a silk ribbon now felt like a wire. He leaned forward, his further head pressing against mine, his breath warm against my lips. "You're curious," he murmured, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin of my inner wrist, a rhythmic motion that tried to soothe the very anxiety he was causing.
He climbed out of bed, leaving me breathless and shivering in the wake of his sudden distance. He moved to the window, the sunlight silhouetting a body I thought I knew, while the man inside remained a total stranger. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but then he turned back and gave me that look, the one that made me feel like the only woman in the world. He crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping my face in his hands, his touch tender yet possessive. "Trust me," he whispered, kissing my temple with a lingering sweetness that felt almost like an apology. I nodded, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. My hidden desire wasn't for his money or his thrill. It was for a version of him that didn't feel like a beautiful catastrophe waiting to happen. But as his hand slid into my hair, pulling me just a fraction closer until our breaths mingled, the cracks in the walls of my intuition widened, and I let the floodwaters in. I silenced the intuition that had never failed me before. I decided right then and there to ignore the alarm bells. I leaned into him, closing the final inch between us, unaware that I was stepping off a ledge I couldn't see. The breaking point arrived at a gala I never wanted to attend, draped in a silk dress Julian had chosen, a shade of crimson that felt like a warning label. The room was a sea of masks and forced smiles, but my eyes were anchored on Julian as he stood across the floor, deep in conversation with a woman whose hand lingered just a second longer than she had to. Jealousy was a feeling I didn't like to admit, but seeing her lean in, whispering something that made Julian give that low, melodic laugh I thought belonged only to me, felt like a physical blow. The air in the ballroom turned stifling. I retreated to the terrace, the cold night air biting at my shoulders, trying to steady the frantic rhythm of my breathing. He has a way of making people feel like they're the center of the universe, doesn't he? I spun around to find Marcus, Julian's business partner, and the one man Julian had explicitly told me to avoid. Marcus didn't keep his distance. He stepped into the moonlight, his presence heavy and disruptive that made me feel more seen than I had in weeks. "He's just being polite," I said, my voice trembling with a lie we both recognized. "Is that what you call it?" Marcus took a step closer, invading my personal space until I could smell the faint scent of cedarwood and rain on his coat. "You're shivering, and it's not just the cold." He reached up, his hand hovering near my bare shoulder, a silent invitation, a dangerous temptation. "I see the way you look at him, hoping for a truth he isn't capable of giving. It's a tragedy to see someone like you waiting for crumbs." The tension was a live wire between us. My loyalty to Julian was a fraying rope, and Marcus was the flame held right beneath it. I should have walked away, but the hunger for something real, even if it was forbidden, kept me rooted to the spot. He leaned in, his lips inches from my ear, his voice a seductive poison. "I could tell you what's in that journal he keeps locked away," he whispered, "but we both know you're not ready for the price of that knowledge." I looked up at him, my heart hammering against my ribs, caught between the man who held my heart and the man who held the keys to his wreckage. Just then, the glass door creaked open behind us. The silence following the creak was deafening. Julian stood in the threshold, his silhouette sharp against the ballroom's golden light. He didn't erupt in anger. Instead, he walked towards us with a slow, rhythmic pace that felt more predatory than any shout. Marcus offered a mocking tilt of the head before disappearing into the shadows, leaving me alone with the man I realized I feared as much as I loved. Julian didn't say a word until he had me backed against the cold stone of the terrace railing. He placed his hands on either side of me, trapping me in the small circle of his heat. "I told you to stay away from him," he said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. He didn't look at my eyes, he looked at my mouth, his thumb tracing the lower curve of my lip with a pressure that felt both a caress and a command. "You're keeping secrets, Julian," I breathed, the defiance in my voice flickering like a dying candle. Marcus said, "Marcus wants what I have," Julian interrupted, leaning in until our chests collided. I could feel the frantic thrum of his heart, matching the erratic rhythm of my own. The air between us was thick with the scent of rain and desperation. He leaned forward, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin beneath my ear, a touch that sent a wave of traitorous heat through my veins. For a moment, the lies didn't matter. The journal didn't matter. There was only the weight of his body against mine and the intoxicating power of his proximity. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, his expression a tortured mix of possession and something that looked terrifyingly like grief. "Come with me," he whispered. "Now more galas, no more witnesses, just us. I'll show you everything." He led me toward the private elevator at the end of the hall, his hand gripped tightly around mine. The doors slid shut, sealing us in a silver box of charged silence. As the elevator began its ascent towards his private penthouse,